Welcome to VMware's Multi-Cloud Podcast. My name is Eric Nilsson, and with me today I have my co-host, David Jasso. On the podcast today, we are covering VMware's cloud reference architectures, and with us is Martin Hosken and John Marrone. Martin is Chief Technologist, VMware Cloud Services, and John is VMware's multi-cloud solution architecture. But before we get started there, David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Eric.
Fantastic. So another exciting podcast today. We know we've had a series of them, and we're lucky to have both Martin and John here. So David, why don't you kick us off?
Hey, Martin and John. Hey, it's great to talk to you guys again. I know we talked a lot during the weeks and chatted quite a bit before VMworld. Hey, but it'd be great if you guys could just introduce yourself and spend some time telling us, who you are, where you came from, what you're doing now. And then we'll get into the topic of talking about reference architectures. But first, let's just give the audience a view of who you guys are.
Okay, I'll kick things off then. Thanks, David. So I'm Martin Hosken. I'm based in the UK. I'm VMware's Chief Technologist for Cloud Services. So I've been at VMware around 6 years, but this is still a fairly new role for me since earlier this year. And my role basically encompasses all of our cloud provider partners, our own VMware Cloud and AWS, and also now the new hyperscale solutions that our partners are bringing to market, like Azure VMware Solutions, Google Cloud VMware Engine, Oracle Cloud VMware Solution, and Alibaba Cloud VMware Solution. So really quite a wide role there, and it's getting wider by the day.
All right. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, David. Happy to be here. So my name is John Marrone. I am based in Cincinnati, Ohio. I've been at VMware coming up on 2 years now. First half of my time here, I spent focused primarily on the partner community around VMware Cloud partners, as Martin mentioned as well, driving activation and enablement across that community. Much like Martin, I'm aligned now with the multi-cloud side of our business, where we're focusing on our solution, VMware Cloud and AWS, the cloud provider partner community, as well as the hyperscaler solutions, as Martin mentioned. So my team specifically is engaged in the early stage pre-sales process. We try to help our customers navigate these complex conversations around cloud adoption, whether with a single solution or across multiple providers, and really try to help drive clarity into the strategy, action into their execution, and help guide them along their journey when they're looking to continue their use of VMware Cloud Services.
Cool, guys. Hey, we're going to talk about what VMware is doing around reference architecture, but maybe we could just start by talking about what is a reference architecture, why do people create them, and sort of what people are trying to do with them.
Yeah, thanks, David. So for me, a reference architecture is really, the aim is to give to our customers an idea of what is good practice, what are other customers doing, what has been successful for other customers, and building an architecture full of solutions that are configured, maintained, and operated in a way that makes them easy to consume for all of our customers. So it's really about bringing things together. VMware sells a lot of products now. Vast majority of those products operate together, but actually building a complex architecture that maybe has server infrastructure, desktop infrastructure, Kubernetes infrastructure, that's not something we can do easily for most people, not something that most organizations can do easily. So we aim to help them by building out some reference architectures that are really designed to be starting points, and they can then actually give customers an idea of which way to go when they're building out and configuring these complex environments that we're building today.
So Martin, I have a question around this. Like, is it because it's technically challenging, it's particularly hard to do, or is it just because for me there's just so many options and so many new technologies that fold into this? Just learning all the technologies that operate my own data center, then throw in a big cloud provider and all of their services, and then understanding which ones to use and which ones not. For me, as an IT administrator for many years, it would seem almost overwhelming the number of pieces of technology I would need to learn in order to build a good architecture. So is it because it's challenging, or is it just because the volume of things you need to know that our reference architectures apply?
Well, hopefully it's not because it's too challenging, but integrating products together, whether they're VMware products or they're ISV products, that's, always going to have additional challenges involved in it. So I like to think of it, and sometimes I use the analogy of building a car. For many, many years, VMware has provided you lots of bits. But building a car and operating a car requires more than just an engine, a battery, and tires, all piled up in on a pile in your driveway. You have to put things together in a way that makes them optimal, that they run in a way that is safe, and they run in a way that actually gets you where you need to go. And that's the way I think of building an architecture. Many of our customers now are building incredibly complicated environments with different locations, hosting environments, on-premise data centers, public clouds. They might be using lots of different application frameworks, Node.js, .NET, etc. It might be the Wild West from an application building perspective. And they have to build an infrastructure that can support all of these diverse elements. And that is challenging. And we're seeing more and more customers deploying Kubernetes on VMware and that type of infrastructure, deploying desktops, deploying appliances like firewalls and load balancers as well. So when the whole world becomes virtual, getting everything to integrate and work together, I don't think it's difficult, but a lot of our customers and a lot of organizations do need additional guidance to bring all of these different things together.
Yeah, maybe to add on a few things to Martin's statement there, and extend the analogy about building a car. It's complex and there's a lot of options, right? I don't think there's been a time in technology where there's more ways to do one thing, right? And part of what we're trying to help customers do with these reference architectures is just get started, right? Figure out what is step one, what's step two, and really kind of help them along that path through solution ideas, best practices, and recommended topologies that meet their needs based on customer examples and real world scenarios that we've experienced in the field. Right, so we're trying to help customers and the community have a very kind of robust and meaningful starting point, right? Provide some suggestions and propose paths forward for them to execute on whatever they're trying to do.
Are we considered a neutral partner in the land of, doing reference architecture? So one of the things that I worry about is when I'm building my architecture, if I'm picking a cloud provider and I'm looking at, what the cloud provider recommends, possibly they're pinning me to some of the stuff that will make it sticky for me to stay with a particular cloud provider. I'm wondering if like VMware is considered a bit more neutral in this space.
So I think that's absolutely true. I think, VMware's overall cloud strategy is to be neutral across all public clouds and to provide a consistent platform across on-premise, public cloud, edge, etc. So I think very much we want to be that neutral player. We want to give customers choice, freedom, and control over their workloads to move them into the the location or the public cloud or wherever that may be, in order to optimize the application delivery to the end business. So I think we're trying to bring all of these things together. I think we're doing a pretty good job as well at the moment after developing these partnerships with all of these different public clouds, Microsoft, Google, Ali Cloud, and Oracle Cloud, as well as our own offering, VMware Cloud and AWS. So we're in market across all of these public clouds in order to give customers freedom and choice. And I think that's key there.
Great, Martin. Hey, John, question for you, and maybe Martin, you can follow on. Reference architectures, I've seen a lot of the work that you guys do and others do that sort of exist at multiple levels. We've got some, very high level conceptual, what are your options around clouds and how do those things work? And then getting into very specifics around how do you do like a specific, let's say an API gateway or something that runs across Amazon and VMware. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the different levels that these reference architectures exist at?
Yeah, certainly. So back to the previous conversation, right? We're trying to provide a getting started point, right? A quick start of sorts in a lot of these reference architectures, right? So they range from getting started with VMware Cloud and AWS to integrating with their SSL VPN services to their file services, database services, right from your VMware Cloud and AWS SDDC. So the idea here is to start with, really fundamental and straightforward topics of initial deployment, initial configuration, and then gradually get a bit deeper and more specific with the consumption and integration of native services that one customer could consume from their SDDC. So we've built some of these in multi-site HCX. There's some mobility reference architectures. There's availability zone specific ones. And we're really trying to cover the breadth of what a customer would experience in their day-to-day IT management efforts, right? So we're trying not to only look at it from the point of adoption, but also from expansion, from day 2 operations, and really kind of follow the life cycle of any customer solution from end to end, so we can continue to provide guidance, best practices, and help them navigate, not just the consumption of, the core SDDC components, but if there's value in them consuming native cloud services, we want to be able to speak and show those integrations and the decisions you have to make to consume them.
Well, Martin, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with John there. We every customer is at a different point in their journey to cloud. We want to assist as much as possible in that journey. And once they're consuming their infrastructure as cloud, whether that's on-premise or running VMware on a public cloud adjacent to native public cloud services, we want to be able to help them take advantage of this flexibility. And if you're running VMware workloads on AWS Metal, you want to be able to take advantage of native AWS services like S3, EC2, and others, RDS as well, maybe, just so you can maximize the business benefit of bringing those applications to public cloud. Customers have different viewpoints on this. Some customers are consuming these services just because they want to consume VMware in public cloud. Other customers are consuming them because they want to expand applications into public cloud and have the benefits of both worlds, the advantages of both a vSphere platform alongside the public cloud platform.
Your discussion around AWS, and both you and John talking about consuming native cloud services, brings up an interesting question in my mind, which is how would some of the reference architectures that VMware produces differ than something, say, Azure or AWS would put out?
So I think the key difference is the level we operate at. From an AWS or Azure perspective, most of their reference architectures are all about application delivery. We are focusing on infrastructure delivery at this stage and on what we're doing at the moment. So how do you actually build an application that goes across both of those infrastructures? How do you achieve connectivity? How do you take advantage of these common SDKs across public clouds? How do you leverage those native services? So if you look at, from AWS, they have a concept called well architected, which gives examples to developers of how to build an application leveraging their services. And as Eric mentioned earlier on, many of those well architected are all about building applications that really deeply integrate you into public cloud. And if you wanted to move that application somewhere else, it's a huge level of effort, a huge risk, etc. But with the VMware model, again, back to that flexibility and choice, if you're building that application on a VMware platform, it gives you the control about where you want it to reside long-term, short-term, scale to, whatever the strategy is, whether it's tactical or strategic. You just get a lot of choice and flexibility.
Yeah, there's one thing I'd like to add there, and by no means am I an expert on what AWS or Azure or Google are doing relative to a similar sort of reference architecture. But from what I've seen and what I've noticed is that a lot of the focus and the crux of what they're trying to communicate and show is grounded really in consuming native cloud services first, and then kind of expanding outward towards adjacent services or on-premises infrastructure or applications. Where we're trying to look at this a bit differently and say, we're trying to, one, meet the customers where they are, right? And a lot of our customers are going through on-prem modernization efforts or a move to cloud. Some are already there. somewhere in the middle of it. So we want to look at these from the perspective of, how do we make these impactful and meaningful for the audience and our customers, regardless of where they are in their cloud strategy. So if they're just deploying it, we want to have a reference architecture that speaks to what is, probably on-prem for them, what that's going to look like to connect into a VMware solution within a public cloud, and then subsequently, if they consume native services, what does that additional step look like? So I think maybe one of the big differences that I've observed is just the angle and the starting point from which we build these, right? We're looking at it from the customer's premises and infrastructure to the cloud, where if you look at a lot of the hyperscalers, they're really doing it from an assumption that the customer is going to deploy all these things in the cloud, and then at some point they'll worry about on-prem, and we view that differently.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point you both hit on, which is, I think when I look at some of the work, the architectures that Azure or Amazon does, it's very specific to how do you deploy on their environment only. Whereas we're always thinking about that interconnection between, something that's running on an SDDC on premise, as well as then running in the cloud and then accessing those additional services. So I think that's a great point. Eric, I'm thinking we want to switch and get into some of the specifics around the kinds of resources that VMware has created. But any questions we want to ask on sort of this more general topic of reference architectures?
No, I think most people understand what reference architectures are, and the key value points for VMware's reference architectures are just, for me, the neutrality and then the shortcutting, the amount of learning you have to do in order to feel confident that what you're proposing is going to work in a data center. So, and I think we've covered that pretty well. So let's move on to some of the reference architectures that you guys have worked on.
John, you already started to talk a bit about some of the reference architectures, but maybe you can kind of walk us through and get into some depth on some of the ones we've done specifically for AWS, which is sort of first out of the gate.
Yeah, sure. So maybe starting with getting started with VMC on AWS. So this was kind of the initial one, and really, again, that foundational view of deployment guidance and best practices for consuming VMC and AWS, right? Details of on-prem to VMC connectivity, SDDC networking constructs, compute management gateway differentiation, required firewall rules, ports and protocols to be aware of, how to consume security groups, and other native services like S3 as part of that initial consumption, right? But that one really focuses on customers new to VMC and AWS. Really get into connectivity, what does the networking look like within the SDDC, and just general connectivity, decisions, discussions, best practices, and guidance around what a customer could expect when they start to use the solution for the first time. So there's a few highlights in there. As you'll see, I'm sure there'll be a link to the reference architecture page. You'll see specific highlighted points in there that we try to add some context to. So deployment of the directory service, configuring the compute gateways, and then security groups, right, as an example. But this is kind of the level that initial one stays at, right? It's very introductory, very foundational. And then there's other ones, much like the HCX multi-site connectivity, where it gets a bit into workload mobility. It starts to detail architectural decisions around multiple on-prem data centers and how you would connect to your VMC SDDC for the purposes of migrating workloads in, right? So this gets a bit deeper into the networking constructs and the connectivity practices. It gets into SDDC communications and integration, again, with AWS, and really just what's required when you're going to start to configure your on-prem environment and your VMware SDDC to facilitate the moving of workloads from source to target. So that's maybe a more detailed reference architecture that we have that, again, builds on the idea that the initial deployments happen. There's some familiarity with VMC at the moment. There's a general understanding of network connectivity and how networking happens at the VM layer within the solution.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of focus in on networking in particular seems to be a very strong focus across these reference architectures. How do you set that up in a way that sort of really optimizes that multi-cloud experience?
Yeah, I mean that's traditionally the hardest part, right? And where a lot of the effort goes in deployments, and specifically in the migration of workloads. So all these have a particular slant towards highlighting some of the more impactful networking decisions from a configuration perspective, as well as design best practices for connectivity from on-prem to the cloud.
Martin, you've done a couple of really comprehensive guides in sort of everything from reference architectures to deployment architectures and configuration guides. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about one that came out earlier this year, which was sort of a revision to an existing one, which is called VCAT 5. And love to hear you talk about it from a couple different angles, what it was in its totality. But you and I have spent quite a bit of time also talking about the idea that it's really a great guide for private cloud if you strip out some of the things that are specific to managed service providers.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things we have to remember is that managed service providers, cloud providers, run some of the biggest, most complicated environments that any of our VMware end customers do, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of workloads. So VCAT, or VMware Architectural Toolkit, that's been around for a while. It's been, I think, been around for 4 or 5 years at least, if not longer. But the aim of the new release was to really bring the latest concepts and latest designs to our cloud providers. And as you say, David, many of our enterprise customers like to operate as cloud providers and build infrastructure in a very similar way, so they can service different lines of business, different business units, and effectively cross-charge or do show back charging or whatever it might be. So yeah, absolutely relevant to enterprise customers, but it's all about scale with this type of model. And VCAT really tries to address that scale, building a pod architecture that's effectively like building blocks and allows you to deploy thousands of workloads for customers. As more and more customers migrate onto that platform, you can architect it in a way that you're just adding scalable pods, you're extending your switch infrastructure, you're doing things in a very, very standard way. And that's the aim of VCAT. And the new version as well focuses down on something that we call Cloud Provider Platform. So this is a predefined architecture that our cloud providers, or again, enterprises who want to operate like a cloud provider to deliver services internally, allows them to bring a standard architecture, like a reference architecture, but maybe a little bit more flexibility, because when it comes to cloud providers, it's really about differentiation. Many of our cloud providers offer really key differentiated services to specific verticals like financial services, retail, healthcare, and then having a bit of flexibility about how they build and design that infrastructure so it really aligns with the requirements for those verticals is really key. So VCAT is more of a design guide than a reference architecture, I guess, but the end result is to build a solution that is highly scalable and aligns with a sort of end customer requirement.
So Martin, this strikes me, especially cloud service providers, where it's a pretty complex deployment, as you say. How much of this is the reference architectures are kind of like a guide, but do we back that up with professional services? Do we kind of have training for these things? How is the operation mode of consuming these things and actually using them? A lot of times I used to, there would be a reference architecture, but then it came with, I would hire professional service to come in, who these are people that have done this reference architecture 6 other times at other companies, so they could help me get move forward quicker. How much of that is VMware's practice right now? Do we do that kind of stuff as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. A cloud provider's environment and designing for a cloud provider environment is a fairly unique thing. Of course, there's lots of commonality between, a cloud provider and an enterprise environment, as we've said, the skills that it takes to do a deep technical, physical design for a cloud provider environment the networking skills, the storage skills, the compute, the application level skills, the services to build, to build services on top of that, the billing mechanisms, the integration with backup solutions, the integration with, say object storage type solutions, et cetera. That's really complicated. And VMware absolutely are able to provide professional services around this. We have, multiple teams who have got a lot of experience in building these types of environments globally. They're typically, very sought after projects actually by our professional services, because they are the most interesting projects available for these guys to work on, and these guys and girls to work on. So they're often very sought after within the teams to do them. They're large scale. They require a lot of detail, a lot of complexity and requirement gathering from both the provider and the customers. So, VMware Professional Services can absolutely assist our customers to do that. We also have a lot of education courses around this. So, at the heart of the cloud provider platform is our Cloud Director service, and all Cloud Director running on premise. And this is vCloud Director. It's been renamed Cloud Director now, as some of you may know. But that's at the heart of this solution, and that's available to cloud providers and enterprises as well, under certain circumstances. So, building an infrastructure like this does require skills, professional services. We have a education team and some training courses on Cloud Director. That's been updated literally right at the moment. It's been updated. I'm involved in those updates. So lots of help out there for providers and enterprises who want to build like this.
I could actually see where you would actually even have an audit service that, I'm using a reference architecture, I've implemented it, and I make some changes because reference is just what it means, reference. But then I'd actually like to have somebody come in and kind of look at it and say, okay, before we deploy, before we go, please come in and audit my probability of success, because there's this management of risk that's also a big part of this equation, right?
Yeah, and we absolutely have that. We call it VMware Verified Cloud. So we are able to effectively give a badge to a cloud provider that they can use on their marketing and across the industry, that verifies that this platform has been checked by VMware and meets all the requirements from a scalability perspective, from an availability perspective, performance perspective. So we put that badge on there. I think there's around 300 cloud verified cloud providers globally at the moment. So it's something that's been around about 2 years, maybe 3 years now, and it's very, very popular. If you name some of the big cloud providers out there, I won't name them on this discussion, but if you look at them, the vast majority of them have the VMware Cloud Verified badge.
I just want to say, I didn't know that before I asked that question. That sounds like a marketing opportunity where I just throw that across the plate for you to hit out of the park, but I did not know that. So that's good to know. And I would think that would be the case. And I'm just thinking from my own, I've ran a data center at some point in my career. I operated it. I'm just thinking through like how I would have to tackle, expanding my data center back out into the cloud now. Right. So yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah. And just building on that, it's sort of brings up an interesting point that I'd probably want to put in there, that we're taking that concept and putting it into more and more of the technology. So, if you think of something like SDDC Manager, which checks the configs of your SDDC when you deploy it and make sure that it's not too far out of conformance before you do updates and things like that. So that concept's becoming more and more a part of what we do.
And John, you had something to add here, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe insert kind of a real world scenario around the VMware Cloud Architecture Toolkit. So prior to coming to VMware, I spent the balance of my career working with and for service providers. And one of the larger projects I did prior to coming here was we rolled out a new implementation of vCloud Director across a few data centers, right? This was a ground up build. It was designed to be scalable, multi-site, address billing, address different customer scenarios, and to maybe draw a contrast from the reference architectures to the VCAT book that is being referenced. The book, which we ended up reading cover to cover a few times during that project, it gives what the reference architectures don't, which is very, very prescriptive guidance and detail and best practices and visibility into, from a cloud provider perspective, you have to design your infrastructure. You have to design the service that you're going to deliver to customers for, an unknown number of scenarios and deployment nuances and implementation nuances that a customer is going to bring you, right? Your customer base is not patterned, right? They're not going to come in with the same kind of feel and look and requirements.
Okay.
And what we found, outside of the architectural guidance and outside of the, performance maximums and scaling data points, is that book provided us with, basically a model to build these that were flexible enough for us to accept, with very few exceptions, any customer into our solution and deliver a service to them that didn't break the infrastructure or the design we had, right? So it really kind of afforded us a good amount of flexibility without having to compromise the stability or interoperability of our underlying infrastructure.
Yeah, that's
Awesome.
really
Hey-
interesting. That's rich. I'll
Go ahead.
follow up with, sorry, David, I'll follow up with one comment, which is, it reminds me of the monster VM character that would float around VM World, where you do have these strange requirements that a good reference architecture has to, decide whether they're going to support or not, right? And like, what's the size, what's the scale, what's the speed, what are you expecting customers to come in? And it's like the monster VM, how big a VM do you actually support in by a cloud provider? How big a VM does a cloud provider actually support? All that comes into play when you're talking about reference architectures, right? What's the scope of these guys? So that's an interesting point. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, that was great, John. Hey, it was a great plug for Martin's book too. So, the other thing I'd say about Martin's book, and I mentioned at the beginning, is that even if you're not a managed service provider, and even if you're not doing a massively huge scale project in your own data center, it's a great guide for private cloud. 80% of it is relevant, and it covers, it goes into depth on compute, storage, networking, management. So it's a great asset, even if you're just doing, a private cloud for your enterprise and it's not massively scalable. It doesn't have to be. Of course, if you follow the guide, you'll have all the scale you need, but it's a great resource for that. Martin, you've got another project going too, right? On VMC on AWS that's similar.
Yeah, so I'm effectively rewriting a book that we wrote in early 2019. So VMware Cloud and AWS, of course, is VMware's preferred model for running vSphere workloads on public cloud. I wrote a book, I think it was early 2019, but not long after we brought this solution to market in 2017, which really provided, a good deep level of guidance on, designing, building, migrating workloads to this platform. But since I wrote it, there's been quite a lot of changes, new instance types, new networking capabilities, 2-node configurations, lots of other integrations as well. So I'm doing a refresh of this book at the moment. Hopefully by mid-November, it'll be downloadable if you search for it. So it's a modern infrastructure on VMware Cloud and AWS. And it'll be available, of course, as an ebook. We may hopefully print copies if we ever get to meet people again in person. But yeah, initially it'll be available straight away as an ebook.
Cool. Hey, John, your team's working on some great resources too. Maybe we can chat about that.
Yeah, certainly. So largely, we've been talking about the reference architectures from a perspective of VMware Cloud and AWS. So as we mentioned in the beginning of our chat, right, there's now a slew of VMware solutions on our hyperscaler partners' clouds, right? So Azure VMware solution, Google Cloud VMware Engine, Oracle Cloud VMware solution. So as we think about what reference architectures look like going forward, what would be valuable to the community and impactful for our customers, we want to continue down the path of creating these for VMC, but now we want to start incorporating, a multi-cloud view of these, both from, if I'm going to have to architect networking across multiple clouds, what does that look like? What are the best practices and considerations I need to take into account, both from a just traditional networking construct perspective, but also consider the nuances of how each individual hyperscaler partner does their underlying network. So we're looking, and we're hoping to release a few of these at the end of this quarter for us. One's around, again, architecting a multi-cloud network. Another one is architecting multi-cloud application mobility. And then architecting an approach to modernizing apps in, name your cloud. So we're going to look to do those both from a overall kind of multi-cloud perspective as a foundation, kind of getting started, quick start, right? So back to the sequence we talked about before. When we start to introduce these new reference architectures and associated blog posts, we want to set a good foundation first. So this initial release will be in the quick start space. Building on top of that, we want to get into more of the application modernization specifics relative to multi-cloud and specifics around VMC as our first-party service, but then also our hyperscaler partners. So that's what we're working on a strategy for now. We're starting to line up what those topics and what those series look like. And again, we're hoping to wrap up a few we have in motion by the end of this month. Kind of run them through their paces internally for validation. And clean them up and then release them here shortly. The thing to note that we haven't talked about thus far is that when we're designing and putting together these reference architectures and the documents and the context about why we did it, we're not doing these from a purely academic point of view, right? So we're not reading the manual, understanding best practices and constraints, and then building something in theory. So we deploy all these solutions as they're being represented in the architecture. We validate functionality, configuration, interoperability, and that's really what drives the development of these. So as we get access and we learn more and we start to build up a library of experiences and customer use cases, we want to translate those into meaningful and interesting reference architectures across the breadth of our cloud solutions.
Well, very good, very good. So one of the things I always like to talk about to John and Martin, and David, you can jump in too if you want, is what are some of the goals that you're trying to do with the program as you go forward? I know we've talked a lot about what you're doing, how you're doing it. Are there any kind of big goals for next year that you guys are thinking how we could, what we could do to make it better, or some of your favorite pet projects you have? I always like to look forward and think about, what are you guys doing? What are the kind of the big things that you might be able to add in the next year or so? And I know you can't talk too much about, confidential things, but could you give us a sense of where you might be going?
So I can come in here. When we look at these cloud platforms that we've talked about across, running across, both our traditional VMware cloud partners and also the new hyperscaler models like AWS and GCVE, the key for VMware is to be relevant to our customers and building applications across multiple public clouds, leveraging all ranges of technologies, traditional legacy VMs, new VM builds, and of course there's still an awful lot of applications being built on virtual machines and even physical machines. Then we move into the container world and Kubernetes, and then the PaaS world as well. And what's going to be key for VMware and what VMware is really able to offer our customers is consistency across this entire world, from both an operational perspective, from an SDK perspective, from an API perspective, having a infrastructure, and it doesn't matter where it runs, having an application, and it doesn't matter where it runs, security policies will follow that application. The infrastructure will scale as required for that application to run. When we build new applications on Kubernetes or using PaaS solutions, the underlying infrastructure will scale as it's required to scale, as those applications need to scale up, maybe for specific times of year like Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then scale back after the early January sales. So having a flexible, consistent infrastructure, no matter what type of application you're running, what your security requirements are, that's really key for VMware. And we're way down that road already, but there's always going to be more and more things to add to that portfolio, better integrations, better making things easier to implement, and making security transparent for our customers.
Nice. I know that I'll follow up, David, with going to VMworld and listening to some of the big talks at VMworld, there were a couple things that stood out for me. One was I got to listen to some security and the security threats and some of the security breaches where they're now getting in and destroying your backups and then requiring you to pay millions of dollars in Bitcoin. This has happened to 10 or 15 major companies across the globe. So I can imagine that security and the reference architectures for security, and then paying attention to that and how much of that do you publish. And then the second one I thought was interesting was vGPUs and the whole machine learning and utilization of graphics processors in your data center to do some of the machine learning. Thought some of those were there. Were there any other key takeaways for VMworld that you thought was interesting that you might want to weave into next year as well?
Well, Project Monterey, of course, is really interesting. That concept of extending hardware. For a number of years, a lot of people have been saying that hardware is just commodity. I don't know that it is. Maybe one day it will be, but integrating smart NICs, integrating GPUs natively into the vSphere infrastructure to optimize machine learning and artificial intelligence. I think maybe we've still got a lot of future for differentiated hardware. I think that's one of the things that I got out of VMworld this year. I think the other thing I really would like to highlight is, obviously we were completely virtual this year, just like every other tech conference. In future, whether it's next year or whether it's 2022 when we're back in the room together, I'd like to see how we can leverage the best of the virtual world alongside the best of the physical world. And I think that's going to be key, not just for VMware, but for the tech industry, throughout the globe. How, there's now dozens of tech conferences, huge tech conferences, at every quarter of each year. People just can't keep traveling to these tech conferences continuously. They want to be able to leverage the best of the physical world and the virtual world. So I think it's going to be really interesting how both VMware and other, other organizers of these types of conferences address that in future.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. One of the big, pieces of value you get from these conferences is the community participation, the ability to get in front of customers, answer questions about what they're trying to do generally with their business, but also, talk about the new announcements, right? And it's kind of, it's good immediate feedback you get when you get to meet with customers in person. And I think that's going to be, hard to replicate virtually, but I completely agree with Martin. There needs to be a good mix and a good combination of how do we make the most out of everybody's time and investment in these, so that it has kind of the maximum impact, but you're still, you're still able to deliver the message and have the interactions you need. This was supposed to be, well, it was my 10th consecutive VMworld, but it was the first virtual. So there was a big kind of contrast in the ability to get to more sessions and consume more information. Was pretty great this year round because you didn't have to fight with traffic and times and lines and seats in the conference room or lack thereof, right? So I as a, I'm a VMware employee, but for VMworld, I'm a participant, right? I'm also trying to learn, and it was really, really kind of great to be able to consume on my own time after meetings and customer interactions were done, but generally have kind of a body of information to pull from, so that I kind of got the maximum value out of it.
Yeah, I thought VMworld, I was actually not sure what to expect, but I thought it came out well. I thought they did a super job turning that into a virtual event. And the show's over, but there's the catalog is still alive for the breakout session. So if people didn't go and they want to go see that, they still can register and get access to some, I think 700 sessions or something like that. So certainly something people can still take advantage of. I thought it was an awesome show.
I got two comments for Martin's original comments, right? Which is hardware is king. I couldn't agree more. I'm a big hardware fan. I love hardware. I think I'm just going to create a blog called Hardware is King. Remind me when you see this, I think that's going to be my 2022 project. It's just
our hardware is back.
Hardware is king. Like it's never been gone. We've just abstracted it away, but the reality is it's awesome. The second comment for me, and I think it's interesting, is that if I think I want to go for 5 years where I don't turn Zoom on ever again, right? Like I think I'm just going to go places, meet people, and I am just so zoomed out that I don't want to learn anything on my computer anymore. I think I'd rather have a Braille book than try to learn more on a Zoom call. I am so zoomed out. But I think I've been to 20 now VMworlds, and I thought we did a great job with this one given the circumstances. But I also missed, the community booth, the community theater, community sessions, meeting people, running around, being jet lagged at VMworld Europe, all that good, happy stuff. I can't wait to see everybody again.
Yeah, I thought they did a good job, but I definitely think the face-to-face is awesome too.
Yeah. So David, I think we're at the top of the hour here, pretty close to it. Any final things from Martin or John we want to cover? I don't know if they're on Twitter. We usually do a shout out to people so that if they do have Twitter, people can connect to them.
Yeah, I'm certainly on Twitter, Hosken M, at HOSKENM on Twitter, and by all means follow me there or look me up on LinkedIn. It's always good to have a good community, and I'm really enthusiastic about that. And it's one of the best things about VMware is the community.
Yeah, LinkedIn and Twitter for me as well. At JJ Marrone on Twitter. It's
JJ Marrone.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, David, do we want to wrap up? Anything else you want to cover?
No, I think it was great having you guys. Thanks for coming, and thanks for giving us some insights into what VMware is doing around reference architectures.
Yeah, great show. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.